This is an Audio Wool original.
This episode of Frightday is brought to you by Gates of Hell Chipotle Hot Sauce by Frightday. Bold chipotle flavor blended with habanero peppers for just the right burn. Kissed with garlic and passion fruit. Zero human blood, like none at all. Visit shop.frightday.com before the first batch disappears.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you'd like to support us, go to patreon.com/frightday.
So that's...
Wah wee wah?
Yeah, that's a wah wee wah for sure. I can wear this hat outside. I can.
Yeah, especially, I mean, the font is illegible enough that like a casual walk by isn't going to see exactly what it says.
Good, no problem.
And if they stop and stare too long, then they're weird anyway. So
Exactly. I say, quit reading my Bush did 9/11 hat. Get a fucking job.
Cryptids and conspiracies.
this has been such a surreal experience reporting on Montauk because it reminds me of why I dislike football. It's like you're watching something with a child who has a remote and keeps pressing pause. That's how I feel about this.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to be back into the flow of it. It's way better
Back
than
in
football.
the chair.
I'm back in the chair.
The Montauk chair?
And the Montauk chair. Yeah, last week we got started on Preston Nichols. Now we're going to get into the really cool Preston Nichols shit because I want to make sure that everybody knows, despite him being far less charismatic from poor Bielek, and despite his voice being borderline intolerable and his image being even less tolerable,
He's pretty disheveled. Is he a Nazi sympathizer?
I was not able to uncover anything along those lines.
So-
Maybe the government did not get to him to brain swipe him into being a Nazi sympathizer to discredit him.
Now
the
you're
same way
being a
they
Nazi
did.
sympathizer, and that's not okay.
Oh no, he probably deserved it. No, he didn't. Poor Bielek.
All right.
If he really was a Nazi, may he rest in hell. If he really was brain swiped by the government to make him sound like a Nazi so that people would ignore what he was saying, then may he rest in peace or wherever a person like Bielek heads.
I think he's still alive in Mexico.
Could be.
We
Wouldn't
didn't
be
even
surprised.
talk about it. Are we going to wrap up the Bielek?
We didn't wrap that? I didn't tell you he died in Mexico?
I don't think we ever got to that.
Okay, Bielek died in Mexico. The end of Al.
He retired. His
Well-
death was reported by some sort of fringe
Yeah, he
outlet.
retired and he moved around a bunch. And even when he was interviewing with art and stuff, his position was very unstable. And I
Yeah.
think he had a niece that was trying to caretake for him. And obviously
That
he
seems
had
like a
some
weird,
issues.
like pre-GoFundMe type situation.
If GoFundMe had been a thing, he probably would have been loaded at that point. All right. We've talked a lot about Al.
Goodbye.
Yeah, and he may have been brain zapped into being a Nazi. He could have just been a Nazi.
Sure.
But he actually wasn't the person who brought the Montauk Project to light, and I think it's time that we give Preston his... Well, he probably did something as bad, but we're not going to talk about that until the end of this episode. Preston Nichols, curious man, born in 1946, got a bunch of interesting stints at colleges, and then got some kind of an engineering degree, and then also a parapsychology degree.
What was that last thing you said, though?
Parapsychology degree.
Oh, okay. Can you get a degree in that?
Yes?
Is it valid and useful?
It's all in the eye of the beholder.
And that's all that matters. Preston's holding that piece of paper, screaming at the sky.
Yep, that is actually probably something he would do.
All right.
He died too, though. He died in 2018.
Rest in peace.
And, well, you can decide whether you mean that or not in a little while. Before we just completely make him sound batshit, I need to give you some context for this period of time in American history. World history, really. In the 1960s, 70s, you remember MK Ultra.
I sure do.
One of dozens of projects going on that had to do with mind control, brain waves, psyops in general, which if you ever listen to an interview with Preston, he will use that phrase so many times that you will hate it like I do now. But it's important for you to know that that is a real thing. And I printed off this massive...
What you got there?
Hold on, I got to show you, Byron.
So many documents on this desk in the studio,
Yep.
which is nice.
Yep.
Thanks for showing up.
Okay, so Byron, there was on a stealth skater website. I don't remember if we talked about this, but he has like a 40-page document about the timeline of secret government projects. And let me tell you, what was going on at this point in time, there was so much. And in fact, there is a document sent to the U.S. Congress talking about remote control of human behavior by radar.
You know that's not really possible, right?
In some ways, it very well may have been. And honestly, this does tie back to the Havana syndrome.
Yeah, I was going to say, in really, really simple ways.
Well, I don't know. This is one of those topics that it was really hard for me to just touch the surface of and move forward. I had to because there's too much. But at some point, Byron, we need to dive way deeper into this because there's some very interesting information here. The number of projects that are at least known that the government conducted, specifically with extremely low frequency waves and control and monitoring thoughts and instilling thoughts and et cetera, et cetera. Before I fall down that rabbit hole, just know that that stuff was going on. So it wasn't crazy that Preston Nichols says he was working for a defense contractor. He came on at the end of the time that they were working on stealth technology in the late 60s. Things were really getting hot and heavy with PSYOPs related research. And so Preston finds himself in 1971 starting some specific PSYOPs research.
I just was going to put it over here. Are you
There
going
you
to refer to
Yeah.
this again?
No, I think we're good.
I'm just
I
trying
mean,
to find you
not
some
during-
table space because you showed up like with enough paperwork that you are all three of the smoking gunmen for some reason.
Yeah.
And-
I'm sorry. There is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a big desk. I spent a lot of time
Pretty big
building
desk.
this desk.
It's a nice desk, Byron.
Thank
It's a
you.
pretty
Appreciate
desk.
it, but
It's a pretty desk.
Now it's covered with weird sticky papers.
Yeah. So if you'll remember from last week, he says that while working with the same contractor, he got to see UFOs. There's a very interesting write-up about his discussion of UFO technology and how that ties to the Montauk chair. But right now, we're going to talk about what other project he was working on that ultimately led him to Montauk.
This is pre-chair.
Pre-chair. He's trying to test people's psychic abilities. And remember in Ghostbusters, Bill Murray,
I'm familiar with the
at
character.
the beginning. So we've got the opening scene in the big library, and then it goes to Bill Murray conducting an experiment with a very nice looking young woman and a man and trying to test their psychic abilities. You remember that?
Yeah.
What is it?
Figure 8.
Incredible. That's 5 for 5. You can't see these, can you?
No.
You're not cheating me, are you?
No, I swear they're just coming to me.
Okay. Nervous?
Yes. I don't like this.
You only have 75 more to go. Okay? What's this one?
It's a couple wavy lines.
Sorry. This isn't your lucky day.
I know. I'm getting a little tired of this.
You volunteered, didn't you? We're paying you, aren't we?
Yeah, but I didn't know you were gonna be giving me electric shock.
That actually was the type of stuff that was going on. And this was the type of research that Preston specifically was engaged in. He goes into, of course, a lot more detail about what that research looked like. He was testing if a wave could be termed a telepathic wave, and if you could monitor the frequency of it, if it behaved like a radio wave. He says it did. He studied the lengths and other things having to do with these waves using his engineering
talking
background.
about the signal sent from
A
the
brain.
mind to another mind.
One brain.
If there's a wave that represents that. Okay.
And he was very excited about this. Definitely a nerd.
Oliver,
you're very sweet, but I need you down. Thank you, buddy. He was doing lots of research about this, and also I believe this may have been when he started his parapsychology degree because he started digging into metaphysics. But keep in mind, this whole time he is working for this well-known, long history defense contractor, okay? He's been doing this for about 3 years, and he noticed the people he's testing, every day at the exact same time, their abilities just froze. The waves weren't looking correct. They weren't transmitting thoughts as they could at other times. basically their thoughts were very cloudy. So because he's an electrical engineer, he starts thinking there must be something interfering with their waves. Some type of electronic signal that's being sent out. He's at the Brookhaven lab.
Type, there's a cool truck outside.
I mean, it's a cool car.
Car? Was it a Honda?
It was a Honda.
Oh my
There it
god,
goes.
it
There's
sounds
the
like
Honda.
a Honda.
Yep.
I'm a car guy.
He was at the Brookhaven National Laboratories on Long Island, and he decided that whatever was jamming things up for these psychics had to have been coming from somewhere nearby.
I
So
see
he
where we're
starts
going.
driving around, all right, monitoring the waves that are coming in, using his radio equipment, and discovered that when there was anywhere between a 410 and a 420 megahertz cycle, his psychics failed. When it turned off, it would take about 20 minutes, and then the psychic's wave abilities would open up again. So he's driving around with a VHF receiver looking for the source of this signal, and he tracks it to Montauk Point, coming from a red and white antenna on the Air Force Base.
I mean, and you thought people with those metal detectors look goofy. I bet this guy looked like a straight
You know,
up...
one thing I will say about Preston Nichols is, much like me, he did not care what other people thought. There was no
Yeah.
shame in that man.
He's got one button-up shirt, and he wears it everywhere he goes.
Yep.
It's that kind of guy.
Yeah. Shame is going to tie back into whether or not.
Oh.
Anyhow,
Are we going to do a whole episode on parapsychology? Because I'm trying to figure out if this is a real thing or not.
most people would say no.
Telepathy, like
Well,
clairvoyance.
remember, we get into the real gray territory there, where we've got remote viewing and we've got...
Yeah.
You can monitor brain waves, obviously. In fact, I had some really in-depth notes that I probably should let go of. Preston talked a lot about radiosonde, which was this device that was based on William Reich's technology. It all ties into weather manipulation experiments that were going on in the 50s, how to manipulate that, and discovered...
We tried to do that in Vietnam, actually.
We did. We've been trying to do that forever.
Yeah.
But found that there was this thing called DOR, deadly orgone.
Oh, no. We're talking
Okay.
about Orgone energy now?
Yes.
Fuck.
As a matter of fact, it apparently had negative psychic impacts. It was even cancer causing sometimes if it was too powerful. But orgone, which is the opposite of deadly orgone,
Okay.
as you might imagine, is positive and was an effect from the air, and it wasn't chemical. There's some kind of weird sexual link with Einstein. Didn't
What?
think that, yeah, he got kind of pissed at William Reich because the way that Reich was researching it had to do with sexual benefits. Einstein was like, you're annoying, this is stupid, this is frivolous, go away.
Well, remember, that was a time when that was the only thing that mattered, was men's sexual pleasure.
Of course. Is it different now?
I hope so.
And even though Einstein said his methods were shit, Reich said it was because the investigation involved the complexities of the human brain, which is why it had to be a little bit different than your normal investigation. And Einstein did mess around with it for 2 weeks.
Got super
The
horny.
Orgone machine.
Yeah.
No, he refuted the claims.
Didn't make him horny at all?
I mean, Einstein didn't admit to it, but Reich really started getting into the idea that it was connected to orgasms, and a happy life was as
But
simple
isn't
as
it
just
spelled differently?
all it took was orgone and orgasms, and your life was going to be amazing. James Bond himself, though, Byron, I don't know if you know this,
Did he shake it and stir it?
he swore by it.
In the books, or like
No, like
Sean Connery?
Sean Connery. Or was it Roger Moore?
It could have been more at that point.
It was one of them. But also, drug-loving writers like Salinger and Kerouac and Ginsberg, they all owned these orgone accumulators. And in a Woody Allen movie,
They got him.
which one was it?
No, they got the New York subway shooter.
Oh, of course they did.
Have you been watching his videos?
No, of course I haven't.
He's got some real unhinged YouTube videos.
Shocking. A guy who would shoot 26 people in a New York subway
Well, some
seems
of it
unhinged.
some of it was shrapnel injury and smoke inhalation. He only shot 10 people. He was a regular Riddler.
In Sleepers, a Woody Allen movie, he has this device that is obviously supposed to be representing an accumulator and calls it the orgasmatron.
Cool. All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll use the orgasmatron.
That's a good idea.
Come on.
You know, I think Beverly's nose looked larger tonight.
Oh, oh, it's such a good time.
All in all, though, I thought the party came off quite well. Certainly as good as last night's or the night before's.
Anyhow, this whole DOR thing, because it was believed to manipulate feelings and emotions, actually was a big precursor to Psycorps, an operation that government was already doing in some ways, but this really sped it up. Also tied to it was the fact that Russia had been doing it for a long time, and we're in the middle of the Cold War, and so if Russia's doing it, we have to do it.
We really should.
Yeah.
Like hypersonic missiles.
Yep. And Reich at some point decided, wow, this is really bad. We have to stop the effects of deadly Orgone because it's a weapon. The military, of course, was saying, no, this is great. Let's amplify it because we can use it against the Russians. What did they do? They pulled Reich out of it, and they moved the project to Brookhaven Labs on Long Island. Thus, we arrive back with Preston doing his experiments with humans there. Quick summary and this is from Scientific American, Byron, regarding alpha, beta, and theta waves, all right? This is going to be like I promise. It's going to be fast.
No, it's fine.
I know your eyes are glazing over already, though, so I'm a little worried about you. Stop reading the story about the shooter.
No, I'm not reading that. I'm reading about how horny Orgone makes people.
Okay. Your brain, Byron, it's an electromagnetic organ. It generates 10 watts when it's fully functioning, which is not a lot. But it is electrical, and the electrical activity shows up as waves. There are 4 categories of those waves. Beta is the most active. The brain emits these when you're really using your brain.
Okay. So a refrigerator takes between 350 to 780 watts or 35 to 70 people. Just line them up in the garage.
Yep, and you can run. So all you need is a lot of humans, and you can run your refrigerator.
Wow.
But like when I'm doing my research, Byron, I'm in beta wave mode.
You think you're on the higher end of that?
I have to be. Yeah.
Okay.
Low amplitude. The fastest is about 15 to 40 cycles per second. Conversation is beta. If you're debating, which I never do, you're in high beta. Okay. So I think that maybe sometimes I'm just tired because I am always
juicing. Yep.
Apparently. Alpha is slower, higher amplitude, only 9 to 14 cycles per second. When you finish a task and you take a minute to chill, you're alpha waving then. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, but this is Scientific American.
I'm getting uncomfortable because this is sliding into some sort of new agey belief.
No. This is the only pure science I'm going to talk about tonight.
Right.
This is literally from Scientific American.
All right.
Okay, so this part you can believe. You can write off some of the rest of it if you want to. This is Scientific American. And these are really, like, you can look this up.
No, I trust you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Then we've got theta waves, which is kind of when you're daydreaming or when you're driving and you realize that you don't remember the last 5 minutes of driving.
Or when you edit an entire podcast episode.
And you don't remember doing it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's when it's autopilot, basically. It's very slow cycles, only 5 to 8 cycles per second. Has an even higher amplitude than alpha. So if you look at a wave, Byron, the amplitude is how high it goes up and how low it goes down.
Okay.
All right. Now in theta, tasks are so automatic that you can mentally disengage, as you were talking about with your podcast editing, Byron. This is where flow is, okay? It's also an absence of censorship or guilt. So this is where the shameless live. I'm pretty sure that I'm actually always in theta.
Okay, and there is going to be an image graphic of this to help you out in the show notes of this episode of Frightday.com.
Yep, and then delta is the slowest, 1.5 to 4 cycles per second. Never quite 0. That's when your brain's dead. So if, for example, like real science, if they're monitoring to figure out if somebody who's been in a horrible accident is actually brain dead, they are testing their waves.
They'll look at their waves.
Yeah.
Okay.
Delta is very slow, but it isn't dead. If you're in really deep, dreamless sleep, that's delta. It's like 2 to 3 cycles per second.
Yeah, I was going to say this sounds a lot like the REM cycle.
Yeah, and this is science. Now we're going to move into experiments that the government really did. You can decide your own conclusions about what they got out of it. But researchers for Project Phoenix were measuring how those waves, each of those different types of waves, were impacted by deadly Orgone. And this was also a really interesting time because computer technology was just getting ramped up. In fact, von Neumann's model was used for computer development. Von Neumann was involved in a lot of this research, as well as obviously what we've heard a lot from Al Bielek about. So they use this emerging technology to track how certain stimulus would change the waves that people were emitting.
What kind of stimulus were they testing?
Well, we're going to...
Are you talking about guys again?
A little bit.
Okay.
A little bit. Eventually, they were able to build streams of information from the waves and basically could make repeatable instructions.
You're not going to tell me the second that we got computer, we started looking at porn on it, are we?
I mean, probably, but they could manipulate, recode, and transmit those waves because they could capture them and build streams from them. Now, this was showing a lot of results, but they needed more resources. They took it to Congress, very similar to what we talked about with the Philadelphia experiment. Congress goes, no, this is scary. We can't do this. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that it died. It just means it went, onto the Black Project list, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was just hidden from that point forward. It was the late 60s, early 70s at this point. Congress got so pissed about it that they said, we're shutting you down. So abruptly, they didn't shut down, but they did need a new funding source. And this is where we get into Nazi gold. And Byron, I have made the command decision that rather than wandering down another tangential path, we're going to do a Patreon exclusive where I tell the story of the Nazi gold that funded.
I mean, we could talk about so much hidden Nazi treasure too, but
no,
you
this
want to
is
be very
just specifically. Yeah, this is a specific story about.
Isn't there like a train missing somewhere?
There's a missing train. There's a missing train. Some people think it was the missing train that funded it, but
Really?
it's actually a different source of Nazi gold that funded it, and we are going to do that in a Patreon exclusive episode.
Great.
All
Can't
right.
wait.
Okay. So here we are. We're back to Preston. He's roaming around and he sees this, but the security of the place where this radar signal is coming from, the Air Force Base, Camp Hero, is super tight. And he can't learn anything. He makes some phone calls, tries to figure out what's going on.
Is it different than like the Bob Lazar situation where they're giving partial information to so many people?
No, not at this point, because he had nothing to do with that research. He was at a separate private contractor at Brookhaven National Laboratories. He was not privy to what was going on at Montauk. He just knew that it was messing with his experiments.
Yeah, because he had the
at
weird...
Brookhaven.
Yeah.
So he asked around, tried to get some answers, but unfortunately was really not able to gather much information. For the next 10 years, he's continuing to do random projects. He's still working in some of the PSYOP stuff. And kind of out of nowhere, one of his friends called him who remembered what he had talked about 10 years earlier regarding this problem he had with the wave interference. Because literally at the time, since he couldn't do anything about it and he couldn't get on the base, he just adjusted his experiments and said, okay, well, this time of day, clearly we're just going to have to not be trying to do work because it's pointless for us to try during that period of time. So this friend calls him and is like, hey, I don't know if you know this, but that base is totally abandoned now.
Really?
Preston was like, wait, what? Okay. So he, of course, goes out to the place.
He doesn't seem like a fence hopping type.
Well, you're right that he's not, but he didn't have to hop fences. It was totally abandoned. There was debris everywhere. He could just kind of walk in. It wasn't like he had to hop anywhere. It was pretty...
When you say debris, are you just talking about like the remnants of the old...
I'm talking about some pretty crazy debris. There's a fire extinguisher, a bunch of papers. He has pictures in his book of some of the papers that he picked up that appeared to be like Air Force official documents. The gate was open. Windows were open. The doors of the buildings were opened.
Did you happen to see that bizarre VHS tape?
And that is Montauk. I mean, he's touring it. It's really... That's where he is.
Before we go out to Montauk, I'm going to take you on a tour of this installation and show you the two receivers as featured in the Montauk book and also the Delta T antenna here at Space-Time Laboratories. We now will go and show you the installation here and then out to Montauk. This is the receiver room at Preston Space-Time Laboratories. This is where we can monitor the world from, in this room full of radio receivers. Now this is RR-24 radio receiver as acquired from Dr. von Neumann upstate. Now we're out at the Montauk Air Force Base. We're now heading into the Air Force Base using the back entrance. Now we're inside the fence. This is the area is closed. If you go in here, you run risk of getting a fine of $50. Be careful if you go in. The signs say this area of the park is officially closed. Do not enter, no trespassing.
It's like an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was not when he made his tour video,
No,
but this
this
was the
is
first
before
time he
that.
actually set foot on that campus, walking around, and he sees that there's high voltage equipment everywhere. again, nerdy dude, super interested in any type of radio engineering equipment. He's a collector of, what would you guess a guy like Preston would collect?
Shortwave radio.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. He's a collector of ham gear, and so he wants to buy what's left over here. He's an honest citizen connected to the government, so he doesn't want to get in trouble for anything. So he made the proper arrangements, contacted a surplus disposal agency in Michigan. Okay, and this is what you go through if you're trying to acquire surplus military equipment that they don't need and they're trying to dispose of. He looks at all the equipment, contacts the agency.
It's like, I broke into your building.
Well,
I'd like to buy these things.
Yeah, he told her what he wanted, and she said, well, let me see what I can do for you. He made it very clear that it looks like the whole place is abandoned, and I would like to get a scrap contract for this, because only somebody like Preston Nichols would know that you can get a scrap contract.
He's experienced in
he's a
whatever
very,
that industry
he's a really weird dude. He doesn't hear back from her, though, which was kind of weird, because this was something he was familiar with doing, and it was very strange that he didn't hear back at all. He finally followed up with her almost a month. I think a month had passed. She said, actually, we can't figure out who owns that equipment. We've been trying to track it. The military doesn't know. General Services Administration knows nothing about it. But we'll keep looking for you.
Sounds like a black project to me.
Yep. Another couple of weeks later, he calls her again.
She's dead.
She says, I'm going to need to put you over to this fella who's at a military overseas terminal. Of course, Preston, because he's very creative, refers to this guy as John Smith. Okay. So he meets John Smith, doesn't want to talk about anything on the phone, and said that officially nobody can admit to owning this equipment. But as far as he was concerned, go take whatever you want.
Wow.
Right.
What a deal.
Met up with Preston, because even though it was an overseas base, it was like it must be like an overseas terminal communicating with overseas military bases, because it was in New Jersey. So he brings a piece of paper to Preston, says, hey, this is all you need. Nobody will bug you if you're on the campus with this. And Preston said it didn't look that official and it wasn't registered with anybody, but this guy said it would work. So, okay. As you might imagine, basically the next day, Preston says, okay, now I'm going. He gets to the base. He meets the caretaker there, who's a guy, Mr. Anderson.
Smith and Anderson, huh?
Yep,
All
yep.
right.
He said, yeah, be careful. Here are where things are. There's some places you need to be really careful because you could fall through the floor. Take anything you can on this trip, but I don't know what that piece of paper is. And if you come out again, I'm going to have to kick you out. So just take everything you can now, because I'm not letting you back in. His job was technically like to not let people onto the base. So
even though he had a weird handwritten piece of
paper from some random dude that actually had, I don't know.
It sounds like he's not talking to a single person who's official. I think this other guy's squatting too.
Well, speaking of squatting, wait until you hear this. Keep in mind, this is all Preston's journey into what would become the rest of his life, okay? He's got a friend with him, Brian, who is a psychic. Bearing in mind at this point that Preston very much believes in psychics, because this is what he's been doing experiments on for the last 10 years. Yeah. I mean, he's just, what the fuck is Bill Murray's character in Ghostbusters?
I don't know. Venkman?
Venkman.
Is that right?
He's just Venkman, okay? He's like a much less attractive, much worse voice Venkman. They're looking around the base. They go in a couple of different directions. Preston, happens to go into a building and sees a homeless dude. And this homeless dude said that he'd been living there since the base was abandoned.
Oh, so he knows when it was abandoned then.
Uh-huh. And he says a year ago, there had been a ton of equipment, much more than you see right now, but everything went crazy. Whatever had happened that day had really traumatized this homeless man, who apparently was not homeless at that point, but has since become homeless. Here's where it gets really weird, Byron. The man looks at Preston and says he knows him.
Oh, God.
And Preston's like, I don't know you, but okay, tell me your story. He said that he had been a technician at this base. He had abandoned his post right before everything went haywire because he knew that things were headed in a really scary direction. He didn't want to be there. He starts telling Preston about this giant beast that appeared on the base one day, frightened everyone away. At first, Preston was ready to write him off, but he starts talking about technical details regarding the equipment, and Preston's like, wait a second, he actually knows what he's talking about. He finally tells Preston, you were my boss on this project. I don't know why you don't remember this. You were my boss. I saw you every day. And Preston, even though he is willing to believe some crazy things, clearly does not believe this. This is the start of him discovering, in time, that just like Bielek, while he was doing his work at the Brookhaven National Laboratories on the psychic research, he was, unbeknownst to him, being swept in at night to do work at Montauk and was living essentially 2 lives, one of which he didn't know.
It's another Fight Club.
It is another Fight Club.
Oh, God.
Okay?
In the monster, are we going Demogorgon?
Yeah, well,
Is that
the descriptions of this monster that was unleashed in 1983, the same time that Preston, his 2 good buddies, the Duncan brothers, had traveled to Montauk Air Force Base, it's actually been described as kind of a giant Bigfoot.
So a little bit different than the portrayal in Stranger Things.
Yes, not as sci-fi
Sure.
as Stranger Things, I would say, but sci-fi in the sense that apparently it was a thought manifestation, like these waves that we were talking about.
Yeah.
If you got good enough, you could apparently like manifest things.
I mean, when you say kind of like Bigfoot, I mean, there's been a theory, like time
that
traveling.
Bigfoot is interdimensional.
Interdimensional. Bridgewater Triangle Bigfoot.
Yeah, I don't believe that, you know that, but
Yeah.
this is apparently a very large, powerful. Actually, if we want to go with the Ghostbusters route again, let's say like a Michelin, or wait, no, a Stay Puft version of Bigfoot.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Interesting.
There are accounts of it being anywhere from 10 feet to 60 feet tall. As you might imagine, people who talk about this story are prone to exaggeration sometimes. So
you think?
But they might be exaggerating from some source point of truth. Who knows? All right. As they're leaving, Preston's talking to his buddy Brian, and Brian's like, something feels really weird here. I don't like the vibes.
Think?
This is very
This
bad.
whole thing has been like
Very, very bad.
an unhomed guy telling, "You are my boss. You're my boss."
Preston, being a believer in psychic abilities, says, "Hey, Brian, let's do a psychic reading right here, right now. Tell me what happened here." Brian, of course, confirmed what the homeless man had said, what the unhomed man had said. He also talked about there being really weird weather patterns over this base, mind control, mentions the vicious beast, and that everything in the vicinity was being really affected. Wild animals in the area had crashed through windows, but the thing that Brian kept coming back to was this was all about mind control. This was mind control. It might seem weird to you or I, but for a man who for 10 years had been doing experiments in mind control, it probably didn't seem that unbelievable. Preston was pretty jazzed that he walked off the campus with all of this cool equipment to add to his collection, and this weird nugget inside of his brain that like, something, maybe there is something more there. I don't know. From this point forward, he keeps gathering interesting information about the Montauk Air Force Base and what had happened around it. He had his personal experience with the interference in his psychic experiments, but there's some random dude that knocks on his laboratory door a few weeks later, talks about a bunch of technical details regarding the Montauk project, again confirms what the unhomed man in the building on the base had told him when he visited. He didn't recognize this guy either, but this guy again told him that he had been in charge out there. He was the program director of the whole thing.
2 people saying that is...
It is strange.
That's weird.
It's really strange. Now, the one thing, I don't want to take us out of the story too much, but bear in mind that this is one person telling us that 2 people said the same thing.
Exactly. And we're talking about Preston.
And this one person...
There's a picture of him in
Yeah.
the show notes this episode of Frightday.com, of course.
And Byron, if you haven't already at this point in the episode, I think it'd be a good time for you to play some audio of him just so people can hear him chat a bit.
Yeah.
Well, basically, education is a associate's degree, a BSEE, a MS in electrophysics, and a classified degree in what's known as quantum electrodynamics, which basically is quantum electronics. And I basically started out as a recording engineer working on the Phil Spector. That was after I did a lot of recordings locally in East Islip using a Berland Concertone and a Viking, a Minneapolis tape deck to make many recordings on. Most of the Four Seasons recordings were done on those things. And I then graduated through a professor I had at the local community college.
So, As Preston's hearing more and more about this, he's particularly interested in the weather piece because he does know about previous weather experimentation that the government has done. And he hears from multiple people that it had snowed in the middle of August there. Now, that could just be Montana because that happens.
Well, that happened the year I graduated.
In June.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
That was wild.
It was wild. But Preston decides he's going to take matters into his own hands, trying to figure out what his connection was. And this is how he goes about it. He went and camped on the beach at Montauk Point for a week.
You know, I know a lot of people who, after having a bender, would camp on a beach, but...
Funny you should say bender. He says he went out to the bars in the area.
There we go.
And asked the locals for stories about the base. And this is where he's hearing just crazy things. Animals absolutely flooding into town as though they're running away from something, kind of like you'll see if there's a forest fire somewhere, sure. Right? He starts taking different psychics out to the base and confirming the story over and over again. He even talks to the chief of police, who says there's this really weird 2-hour period that crimes used to be committed. It was the same time every single day, and suddenly we would get this crime wave, and then it would stop.
During the day or during the night?
During the day.
I mean, we're nearing June, and I was revisiting my report I did on lunacy and the lunar effect.
Yep.
Interesting. During the day.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
So all of the weird pieces of information he's gathering are kind of adding up to the same thing, and his memory is starting to slowly come back to him.
Or he's being told who he is.
Well, there was a certain someone who, this was 1984, that right at the end of that year really helped speed up his memory recovery. And this man was none other than Duncan Cameron.
You're talking about the man who time traveled into the 80s?
Twice. Remember, he jumped off and then he jumped off again.
Yeah, but then he stayed there because he's like, this place is bitch him.
Yeah, and he's only been there for 1 year at this point, right?
Had he assimilated to the time?
So he it appears that way. He shows up at Preston's door, again, his lab door, because he's a mad scientist.
Okay.
And he's got some weird piece of audio equipment and wants Preston's help with it.
It's called a Walkman.
Duncan starts talking to all of the psychics that were working with Preston on his research. I'm actually going to read a sentence from Preston's book because the tone of his language is important for something we're going to talk about. Duncan showed a keen aptitude for such work and was extremely enthusiastic. I thought he was too good to be true and became suspicious of him. My assistant Brian felt the same. He didn't like Duncan's sudden involvement and decided to go his own way.
How did he meet Duncan again?
Knocked on his door.
I don't like that vibe ever.
Right, and that's what Brian said. Brian said, I don't know, those of you who have watched Our Flag Means Death, it reminds me a little bit of Blackbeard's assistant getting pissed when our protagonist comes into the story, literally abandoning ship because he's like, fuck you, Blackbeard, I don't like your new dude, peace out.
Self-mutiny.
Yeah.
Wow.
At some point, Preston brings up Montauk and drives Duncan to the base because he wonders if Duncan will recognize it. Now, Preston couches this as like, I wanted to test him to see if he was who he said he was. But it seems just like a weird way to do that. I don't know. Takes him to the Air Force Base. Duncan very overtly recognizes it and starts explaining exactly what each of the buildings were used for. He knows everything. In the lunchroom, where notes that were supposed to be delivered to all of the people on base would go. All the little teeny tiny details. Again, all the details Duncan is giving line up perfectly with the multiple psychics and the weird town barflies that he's already talked to.
Is Preston, how gin-soaked is he all the time?
The weird thing is I don't get the sense that Preston even drinks.
Really?
But I could be wrong. I know Al used to tie one on for sure.
He drank a lot.
Yeah. But I don't think that Preston did. I think Preston
he was a sweet drinker. He was a Mai Tai boy.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
God, that was making me sick. They go on the base. Duncan walks into the transmitter building and suddenly goes into a trance.
Heartbeat noises in the microphone? Mm-hmm. No.
He starts spitting out all these random data points and information. Preston worries about him. Brings him back to his own lab to snap him out of the trance. When I brought him back to the lab, I applied techniques that I'd learned to help Duncan unblock his memories.
Oh my god. We're like clearing the pineal or what? What's going on here? We're not decalcifying a pineal gland, are we?
And I want you guys to think a bit about what that might mean to you.
No, you're not doing this.
I will be back before you know it.
This is a cliff we're hanging on.
There are nothing but cliffs to hang on surrounding Montauk Point.
Wow.
That's it.
All right. Well, next week, what's up? What are we doing? What can we look forward to?
We're going to explain just how involved Duncan was when he landed in 1983. And ironically, you will probably come to the conclusion that I have, which is, well, Preston and Al are the ones that speak most loudly about the Montauk Project. The star of the show is actually Duncan Cameron.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for that report.
You're so welcome.
Next week, we'll be back, I guess, with more Montauk. But Kelly,
Yep.
until then, how's it feel to be throwing these cards away, huh?
I mean, I never throw them away. I keep them in my file box.
Oh, yeah. We've got different destructive patterns. I like to just completely destroy all my old notes.
You want to know
my
my
mine
thought?
are all written, I guess.
My thought process is when I die and people are going through my old things,
horrifying.
I want them to find this shit.
They're going to be like,
yeah,
that woman raised me, says Creature and Puck.
Are you kidding me? Creature and Puck know all of this already.
Wow, but for
they
how
were listening
long?
to a podcast like a month ago and they came screaming into my room, Mom, they just said Montauk. They just said Montauk.
You are a regular mom talk.
Yeah.
And that's the name of your new podcast. When I cut this short, you're gonna,
we just have to go on forever with mom talk.
Oh, hi, Oliver.
Oliver says, I'm sorry that my dad's making fun of you, Kelly.
All right. Kelly, until next week, though, where are you going to be?
At Kelly Frightday on Twitter. And you can email me, kelly@frightday.com. Oh, also, I want to note that some of our listeners have been pitching in tremendously to help me with summary information because, as you can see, Byron, it's a bit overwhelming. So
yeah, it's
just letting you know there.
It's a mess.
Yep.
And I'm at Byron McKoy on Twitter and Instagram. Byron@frightday.com is my email address. And until next Frightday, I'm Byron.
I'm Kelly.
Mind your own base.
Stay scared.
You've been listening to an Audio Wool original, produced by Byron McKoy, theme music provided by Cemeteries. For more programs like this, visit audiowool.co.